Welcome to the Inheritance to Income podcast. This is a space for honest, thoughtful conversations about legacy, responsibility, and decisions families are often forced to make before they feel ready. Here we explore what families pass down across generations, not just wealth, but values, stories, and systems, and how those choices shape long-term stability, impact, and opportunity. Because inheritance isn't just about what you leave behind, it's about how prepared the next generation is to carry it forward. Today's episode is about interruption. Not legacy that ends, but legacy that breaks the expected timeline. It's about what happens when someone is taken too soon. A child, a parent, a sibling, a spouse, and the people left behind, they don't just grieve. They inherit responsibility without preparation. They inherit decisions that they never expected to make. They inherit silence, where guidance should have been present. Over time, that absence itself becomes a type of inheritance. This episode isn't about death confirming grief exists. It's about what research and lived experience shows happens after. What the living are forced to carry, and how that carrying quietly shapes identity, family systems, and legacy across decades. When we say someone was taken too soon, we often think we're talking about age. But too soon isn't primarily about age. When a life is cut short, it's about unfinished responsibility and unfinished impact. When a life is cut short, it's about futures that were being built together, suddenly erased. About guidance that was expected but never given. When a life is cut short, it's about roles that were supposed to be shared that are suddenly reassigned. Research across psychology and family systems shows that early death doesn't just cause immense pain, it reorganizes families. Responsibility redistributes itself. Identity shifts, silence fills gaps where instruction should have been, and this is where legacy begins to form, whether anyone intends it to or not. Before we go any further, let me pause here for just a moment. I realize this may be a tough episode to digest, but if this conversation hits home with you, I'd invite you to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who you know is going through one of these situations. Understanding these impacts, having unaccustomed conversations, and working through their impacts matter, and sharing them helps us reach people who need them the most. Now, let's discuss some of the ways legacy interruption shows up. Each year, tens of thousands of children die in North America. Over time, this leaves hundreds of thousands of grieving siblings. Sibling loss is uniquely destabilizing. Why? Because siblings are not just relatives. They're co-authors of childhood identity. Population-based studies show that bereaved siblings experience significantly higher rates of mental health challenges in the years following the death of a brother or sister, even when accounting for prior mental health issues. Qualitative studies tell us something equally important. Nearly half of siblings report major, lasting changes in families and peer relationships. In other words, life rarely returns to a baseline. Many siblings describe growing up overnight or becoming protectors of parents and other siblings or carrying emotional responsibility no one explicitly assigned to them. They talk of loss showing up at unexpected times, whether it's on holidays and birthdays or even at a movie exhibiting sibling relationships. At the same time, anxiety, depression, survivor's guilt, they often coexist with growth. This matters because legacy isn't only about what families pass down, it's also about what children become in response to that absence. Voids are seldom left unfilled. And age, it matters too. When loss occurs in childhood, identity often forms around the absence itself. When it occurs later in life, adults often measure their own lives against a life that was left unfinished. In both cases, responsibility arrives without consent. Stillbirth and early infant loss are among the least visible forms of legacy interruption. This one Sheila and I understand personally. Because the child or children may not have been known publicly, grief is often minimized. But research shows it's profound and enduring. Stillbirth remains a significant contributor to perinatal loss globally, and studies link it to complicated parental grief that shapes how surviving and later born children are parented. In many families, surviving children are implicitly cast as healing children. Sometimes expectations intensify or protection becomes hyper-vigilant. Sometimes parents carry a hidden grief that they have trouble reconciling, or that we have trouble reconciling. Legacy here is not carried through memory alone. It's carried through how love is expressed, how fear is managed, and how stories are told or sometimes avoided. This teaches us something essential. Legacy does not require longevity to be real. Long-term research following bereaved parents, sometimes as much as 2 decades later, shows still persistent effects. Elevated depression, poor psychological well-being, more health problems, even higher rates of marital disruption. For many parents, grief simply doesn't resolve. It integrates and becomes part of who you are. And here's where we see something actually remarkable. Research consistently finds that many parents engage in what scholars call legacy building activities. They form scholarships and foundations, they become advocates, and they do a large amount of service work, or they pour themselves into philanthropy. Some even make career changes. These efforts don't erase the grief, they give structure to love that has nowhere else to go. So this isn't about moving on, it's about redirecting love and still building legacy. But this is a good place to pause. For many families, philanthropy after loss isn't about generosity first, it's about survival. Qualitative research shows that legacy building activities help bereaved parents. It helps them create meaning, establish purpose, have a reason to wake up in the morning and continue living. One lived experience study of a mother who founded a charity after her son's death found that the foundation became a lifeline and a burden. And that's the part we really need to acknowledge out loud. Legacy-driven philanthropy can be a double-edged sword. Helping others in a loved one's name is associated with post-traumatic growth and better psychological outcomes. But it can also lock families into repeatedly retelling their trauma. So let's be clear. Building something in a loved one's name is a great form of stewardship. But it's not the standard. It's not a moral obligation. Some families build foundations. Some raise children differently. Some become mentors or teachers or quietly serve. Some simply carry that memory faithfully. You see, legacy is not measured by scale. It's measured by sustainability. And legacy work, like grief itself, requires calibration. And sometimes working with the right professionals can help. Research on childhood parental loss shows elevated early emotional distress, fear, anger, intrusive thoughts, insomnia, and a sense of meaninglessness. Long-term studies also show increased risk for emotional and physical health problems, trust difficulties, or risk-related behaviors. But here's the nuance. Adults who lost a parent in childhood often show greater emotional investment in close relationships later in life. Early loss creates a vulnerability, but it can also create a deep drive towards presence and a desire for connection. This is another one that hits close to home. Many who lose a parent early in life grow into adults who are highly responsible, achievement oriented, and future focused. Often they're driven by a sense of carrying a parent's unfinished life forward. This is responsibility before readiness, and it can weigh heavy. There's another layer we don't talk about enough. What happens when children who lost a parent grow up and become parents themselves? Attachment research shows that a parent's attachment style strongly influences how children understand death. Securely attached parents tend to talk openly, helping children develop realistic views of loss. Anxious or avoidant parents, they may minimize or avoid the topic, often increasing fear rather than reducing it. Because childhood parental loss is associated with early insecurity, there's also a real risk of passing down anxiety, avoidance, or even overprotection, unless there is later repair. Some qualitative studies have revealed that recurring themes among parents who lost a parent young are overprotection and hypervigilance, knowing firsthand how fast everything can change. Determination to be emotionally present, parenting in ways they wish someone had been able to parent them. High responsibility and make it count parenting, encouraging competence, achievement, and independence. Some even openly weave the lost grandparents or parents into family stories. And yet others avoid the topic entirely, trying to protect their children from what they consider unnecessary pain. Both responses reflect unresolved grief, not failure. Many maintain a continuing bond with a lost parent. That parent becomes a type of moral and emotional reference point. I parent the way my mom did, or I give my kids what my dad never had a chance to give me. I've seen this firsthand in my own life and in my wife's life. How early loss doesn't just disappear. It quietly shapes how we think about presence, protection, parenting, and what it means to show up for the next generation. My dad, Nella Jeffrey Elijah Francis, passed away when I was just 5 years old. His death certainly impacted the way that I was raised. It likely altered the amount of time I was able to spend with my father's side of the family in the West Indies. It placed a different level of responsibility on my mom and on our extended family, and I can testify to the fact that it has greatly influenced the way that I parent, the way that I show up as a father, and my kids know it. Research on intergenerational trauma reminds us of something really important. Pain can be passed down, but it can also be interrupted. What matters most is not really the loss itself, but whether we process it and name it and recalibrate it. That allows us to build positive legacy. Spousal loss, especially when it happens early, is consistently associated with long-term declines in the quality of life, increased depression and cognitive strain, and even financial and social vulnerability. For those without children, memory itself often becomes the inheritance. At the same time, early death redistributes responsibility across extended family systems. Grandparents are more involved in raising grandchildren. Aunts and uncles often become anchors. Siblings become the strong one. Standing in the gap is stewardship, but without structure or support, it can quietly exhaust the very people asked to hold families together. And while I have a moment, This episode is supported by Reese Francis Studios. Reese Francis Studios helps leaders, families, and organizations turn lived experience into thoughtful, durable storytelling through podcast production, narrative development, strategic content designed to last. Because stories matter, and how they're told determines how they're carried forward. Learn more at reesefrancisstudios.com or click the show notes below. Across all the research, one truth becomes clear. Early loss doesn't just hurt, it reorganizes. People become more responsible, more cautious, or more driven, more service-oriented, more intentional. Not because they planned to, but because someone else didn't get to finish their life, or what we imagined was to be their life. That reorganization is legacy in motion. The question is not whether legacy exists after interruption, it's whether it's carried with wisdom instead of pressure, and how we design that legacy so that it's not left to default. As we close, I want to leave you with words I believe deeply. Inheritance has to come with instruction, and legacy is built with intention. Every family is passing something down, whether they recognize it or not. The question is whether it's happening by default or by design. You don't have to have everything figured out. Pain is real, but you do have to be willing to have conversations that we're unaccustomed to having. So again, thank you for the time that you've granted me. I hope this touches someone in a way that helps. God bless.